In this video, what I want to do is explore some of the basics of anxiety. Now, Bowen and Friedman and others who have studied family systems theory would agree that anxiety casts a long shadow on all relationship systems. In fact, family systems theory is based on the assumption that the one thing that all living organisms share is anxiety. Think of it as the stuff that links us, that binds us together, that motivates us, that empowers us to action. And the basic understanding of how anxiety works in living organisms and organizations is, as Friedman would say, one of the keys to the kingdom. Let me say a word about anxiety and reactivity, and then I'll talk about the two types of anxiety. Um, five things here about anxiety and reactivity. All relationship systems, whether um, systems in our family of origin, our immediate family between spouses, our work systems, it doesn't matter, sports teams, it does not matter. Any kind of system that you could think about, the United States, any given country, an entire corporation, a nonprofit, a church, all relationship systems become anxious. Number two, anxiety is free floating. That is, it looks for a place to settle. It's going to settle at some point. Number three, often the most vulnerable or the most responsible people in the relationship system, in the relationship networks, are the typical targets. Number four, anxiety affects most adversely the relationship systems that have little ability or capacity to tolerate or manage differences or change. So if a relationship system is going through change and that system does not have the capacity to handle change well, anxiety is going to impact it pretty adversely. And the number five, anxiety is not necessarily harmful to systems. A way of thinking about anxiety is thinking of it as like energy. Energy. Now, there are two types of anxiety. There, there is acute anxiety and chronic anxiety. Now, systems with acute anxiety are crisis generated. So, a system that becomes acutely anxious might be because the result of a death or the result of a loss of a job or a car wreck or something like that is completely unexpected that causes the anxiety in the system to rise. That causes and so an acute situation is often situational or time based, so it lasts for a particular amount of time. Generally, acutely anxious systems, most of the time, nearly all the time, can regain their perspective. So self regulation is possible, and the capacity to control reactivity is present. So all systems at some point, think of a church system that loses its longtime pastor, or think of if Amazon, or all of a sudden if Bezos were to die, some kind of sudden and tragic, unexpected death. That would be acute, uh, an acutely anxious reality that would impact the entire system. Um, the United States experienced acute anxiety when Kennedy was assassinated, when Martin Luther King was assassinated, as just kind of examples. When a family loses a family member, like a mother might lose their job, or father might lose a job, or a grandmother, a matriarch of a family suddenly passes away. These are instances that cause acute anxiety. Chronic, though, is a little bit different. Now, in this first unit, you're not reading from chapter two of A Failure of Nerve, but I wanted to go ahead and let you know in case you want to look ahead. Friedman deals with the characteristics of chronically anxious families, starting at page 61 in chapter two. And he talks about the five interlocking characteristics of chronically anxious systems. But systems with chronic anxiety, uh, this is like the anxiety is factored into how they operate. So chronically anxious systems are habitual. They function that way as a way of operation. Anxiety is structured into the system. Chronically anxious people systems always focus on others. They're easily and quickly hurt. They always they typically tend to see themselves as victims. They're not good at self-regulating. Not good at self-regulating. Their thinking is either or, yes, no. So it lacks imagination. It's very unimaginative. And these systems are very willful. They try to force you to come to their perspective. Now, when we think of systems, um, uh, in an anxious time, our tendency, and Friedman's going to talk more about this in A Failure of Nerve as he uses natural science to get at this, is to revert to our kind of reptilian brain, our brain, the stem part of our brain. But an understanding of this theory allows us to access our human brain, to cerebrate, if you will, at precisely the times we need it. But chronic anxiety lives in the brainstem, the medulla oblongata, and often referred to as the reptilian brain. This is the fight or flight kind of mechanism in us. Um, the mammalian brain is the next part of our brain, and it gives us the possibility of nurture and attachment, altruism, right? And what is unique to humans is our capacity to think, to exercise our mind, to exercise our power of reason, to think about thinking, to think about emotions and processes, and to intentionally modify our actions. But systems that function chronically tend to operate from the brain stem most of the time. And it almost, I know this is not true, but it almost seems like the brain stem's not connected to the upper hemisphere, that the part of the thinking cap, the thinking part of the brain. Now, Friedman will talk more about this in A Failure of Nerve, but I wanted to give you just a basic introduction to anxiety and how it functions.